The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. My name is Jen Saunders. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and I want to welcome you to our second webinar in a series designed for providers in California who operate or who are interested in operating a rapid rehousing program. The first webinar in the series is held on Friday, May 13th, and focused on the recently released rapid rehousing performance benchmarks and program standards. And you can listen to that webinar by visiting our website, endhomelessness.org. Today's webinar will focus primarily on the first core component of rapid rehousing, housing identification. Today, Marge Worley of Apt Associates will be presenting along with two excellent California providers that Marge will introduce in a minute. As I mentioned, this is the second in a series of 4 webinars. We'll provide some more information about how to register for the third and fourth webinars at the end of the presentation. Just some logistics about today's webinar. All of the lines are on mute right now, so if you have questions or if you need to send a comment, please send those through the question box or through the chat box to us. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And again, the webinar and slides will be posted on our website. And with that, I will turn it over to Marge.
Well, good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us on part 2 of the webinar series. The topic for today is housing identification. We'll start with an overview of this core topic, followed by presentations from program directors who manage 2 rapid rehousing programs in California. After that, we'll have time for them to respond to your questions. So let's get started. Next slide. To rapidly rehouse people who are experiencing homelessness, you and they need rapid access to housing. While this sounds obvious, it takes a great deal of planning and knowledge and skill. Luckily, rapid rehousing has been a successful service delivery model for over 25 years, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can learn the essential program design components, the needed policies, staff training, and target outcomes from the practice standards and from the many effective programs operating around the country. Housing identification is the first core component for helping people exit homelessness and secure sustainable permanent housing. This component can be broken down into 2 parts. The first is developing partnerships with landlords who will accept your clients as tenants despite their housing barriers. And the second is housing search, helping program participants understand the housing market and find housing they want to obtain and maintain. Next slide. Why do you need to take an active part in working with landlords and helping your program participants search for housing? Why can't you just give them the classified rental ads and tell them to come back when they've found housing? Well, the short answer is that we live in the information age where much of everyone's background is accessible to anyone with a computer and a credit card. Actually, much of the information is completely free as long as people know how and where to look. Landlords want tenants who pay the rent on time, treat the property with respect, and treat other people, including the landlord, inhabitants of the building, and also neighbors, with respect, and don't get the landlord into trouble with the police. They see tenant background checks as minimizing those risks. If you've been evicted in the past, have too little income or too much debt, a criminal record, and bad references from past landlords, why should a landlord take a chance on you? I managed 2 surveys of a total of 5,700 extremely low-income county clients in Minnesota, 40% of whom had been homeless 1 or more times in the past or at present, and asked them about their credit, criminal, and housing histories and probable landlord references. 92% of the entire 3,200 had at least one tenant screening barrier that would have caused a landlord from our Landlord Advisory Committee to screen them out. 18% had 6 or more barriers. We found that while these folks, especially those who were homeless, may have been able to find housing on their own, it took months and they often ended up in slumlord housing, which they didn't like and didn't expect to keep. They told us that. Handing them the newspaper ads simply wasn't good enough. Next slide. Today we're going to talk about what is good enough, what many rapid rehousing providers have learned from years of experience. The practice standards have evolved from this experience. The standards will not give you a cookie-cutter approach to designing and operating your own rapid rehousing program. What they do is offer you principles that underlie respectful, efficient, effective rapid rehousing services. They offer you prompts on creating the policies, procedures, staff roles, and training that will lead to the outcomes that you also should expect. You have to fill in the blanks through lots and lots of discussion, probably through trial and error and success, and using data to guide program design, redesign, and so forth. Today we'll be hearing from 2 California programs about their methods of providing housing search assistance. These are programs in urban areas. So rural areas may have to adapt some of these methods, but you're hearing from people in very high-cost geographic areas. If they can find housing for extremely low-income persons who are experiencing homelessness, well, that's a hopeful sign for any program. Next slide. Before we get to our 2 program speakers, I'm going to offer an overview of some of the key points related to housing identification. So first, let's talk about landlord partnerships. Landlords are using tenant background screening because it's the only way to have any assurance that they'll avoid missing rent, filing evictions, repairing damaged units, and dealing with angry neighbors or the police. But rapid rehousing can offer better insurance than that. Rapid rehousing programs have designed strategies that minimize all of these risks. These incentives outweigh the benefits of using tenant histories to make decisions. So landlords are willing to bypass or modify their screening requirements for rapid rehousing program participants. This is why landlords will take a chance on your clients. It's less risky than relying on screening alone. They're taking a chance then as well. Next slide. When you're designing for or potentially redesigning your rapid rehousing program, you need to look at these 2 issues. First, who are the staff who will be working with landlords? To recruit them, respond to them, negotiate with them. The 2 speakers today have a particular approach to this that is considered a very effective strategy. But it's not the only approach. What is clear is that whoever represents your program to and with landlords, that person must have an extremely clear picture of what landlords want and need. The point is to develop solutions that are a win-win for both the tenant and the landlord. Secondly, what is it that your program can offer to landlords? For all of the tenants you refer, and for situations where a program participant's history falls outside the landlord's risk tolerance, such as a person whose history labels them a sex offender, someone who's manufactured drugs. Keep in mind that doing whatever it takes to house all people experiencing homelessness in your community means you may need to go beyond federal funding sources. Communities have successfully raised private funding to cover gaps in a landlord's rent or some types of damage. These are the kinds of incentives that you need to consider. Next slide. So, you will define those incentives. What is the package? You'll determine where you will find landlords. You'll have to do inspections and probably consult public records to make sure your potential partner is not a slumlord. And a slumlord, by the way, is someone with a pattern of significant violation of housing codes and or sustained fair housing complaints, violations of tenant rights, and so forth. You craft a sales pitch. Present the ways your program minimizes landlord risks. Use reference letters from other landlord partners. Listen to the landlord's concerns and figure out how to respond to them. Figure out their boundaries. What kind of tenant screening barriers will they overlook, and which will they not, at least not yet. Be sure you don't send your new partner A tenant that pushes him or her too far beyond that comfort zone. They may be much more willing to push those boundaries after they see they can trust you to resolve problems. Next slide. Once you have a partner, you invest in him or her for the long term. Keeping that partner not only provides an ongoing supply of units over time, but that person is also a recruitment tool for finding new partners. Make it a priority to cut their checks very quickly. If they call, be sure to respond. Don't build a system where a concerned landlord's call is passed on from one staff to another, and if someone is on vacation, the call waits for their return. Be creative, be fair, and make it right. Build appreciation into your everyday operations. Do you have an annual appreciation day for landlord partners? Do you send thank you cards? Offer certificates of appreciation, feature them in your newsletter. Many landlords become very committed to the goal of ending homelessness. They want to know that your program is succeeding and that they are part of that solution. Share the data, share the good stories. Of course, missing identifying information. Next slide. The next set of activities relates to actually securing housing. This is easier for some households than others. The basic level of support may be adequate: timely payments, quick and effective interventions, or mediations when tenancy problems occur, assisting the person to move to different housing without an eviction if problems can't be resolved. But for other households, this will not be enough, and the program may have to sweeten the deal or find another landlord for that household. Rapid rehousing programs must know as much or more than a landlord about the person's tenant screening barriers in order to know how difficult the housing search will be, how many options will be open to the person, which options. This means the program should do a tenant screening or buy one from one of the same screening companies the landlord uses. You will need it. Next slide. Many people who become homeless, in fact the majority, are experienced tenants. They became homeless due to a financial crisis of some kind. They know the drill. Others have much less experience, or their experience shows they need more information about lease requirements or better ways to communicate in landlord interviews. Rapid rehousing staff will need to decide how much and what kinds of help each person wants and needs. But beyond this, keep in mind that homelessness is an incredibly stressful experience. The chaos that precedes actually entering a shelter or ending up living in your car can extend that stress for months of trying to pay the back rent, moving from one doubled up situation to another. By the time you see people, they are physically and mentally exhausted. Their neurohormones are prioritizing fight or flight or freeze, and their executive functions are impaired. So they're less able to make or carry out plans, and their short-term memory is diminished. Their stress overload symptoms may even appear to be a mental health or substance abuse problems. While they will recover completely or partially, quickly or slowly, over time once the stress of homelessness is over, that is, once they're in permanent housing, many may need more active assistance now than you might think. Even if they think they can do it on their own, track their progress. They may not even realize how the stresses of their situation have affected them. Offer more help when needed. Next slide. For experienced renters who have managed their housing relatively well until that financial crisis they couldn't resolve, talking about realistic housing options is likely a brief process. For others, especially if their income has been reduced relatively recently, it may take longer. You also need to be realistic. The great majority of people with extremely low incomes across the country, homeless or not, are severely rent burdened. They pay more than half of their income on housing. It's possible, but not probable, that you can help someone find housing where they will only pay an affordable 30% for housing. But don't focus on that. It's likely it won't be possible. Some may wish to do their own housing search, but many will be happy to have you steer them to partner landlords with a vacancy, especially if you have many partner landlords. And this means keeping track in real time of your partner's units, their costs, characteristics, locations, the screening criteria the landlord is not willing to bypass, and vacancies. Know your partner's lease requirements. Your program participants do not give up any of their tenancy rights just because they have been homeless. The lease they sign should be the same as any other tenant would sign. Next slide. Now that you've heard the bare bones about how rapid rehousing programs do effective housing identification, it's time for you to hear from two program directors about how their staff do housing identification. We'll do this in the same two parts you've just heard. First, how to recruit and retain landlord partners, and second, how the housing search is conducted, how to assist program participants to secure their permanent housing unit. We know there's not nearly enough time to address all the many details of either program's housing identification components, so this is really kind of a taste. But you'll still learn how two programs in large urban areas with high housing costs do what they do. Elizabeth Hewson is the Director of Housing Solutions at Hamilton Family Center in San Francisco. She'll describe her landlord partnership strategy, followed by Chris Freed, Vice President of Programs at LA Family Housing. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Marge. This is Elizabeth from Hamilton Family Center in San Francisco. Our mission is to end family homelessness in the San Francisco Bay Area. Jen, actually, could you go on to the next slide? Great. So I wanted to start off by talking about landlord, and in terms of landlord relationships, what the staff roles are in building and maintaining those relationships. I think it's very important to define the roles that staff play in your program, and that's whether your program is very small or very large. There are staff who do intake and assessment. There are staff who assist the clients with their housing search process. There are staff who support the clients in stabilizing in that housing and in sustaining that housing over the long term. And then in successful programs, there are staff who focus on building relationships with the landlords. And today we're going to talk about the roles on the right-hand side of the diagram, the housing search and the housing resources, or finding the units. Next slide. So in terms of staff, the staffing model in our programs, typically most of what we think about is related to intake and assessment, supporting the clients both through finding the units and through case management support to connect to resources in the community and work on their plan to sustain that housing. And the skills and experience for these staff typically are social services or social work, client engagement, goal setting, support, and resource oriented. Next slide, please. However, the staff who are responsible for landlord engagement, so the key here is that your client, when you're wearing this hat and in this role, your client is not the client who you're working with, who's homeless, who you're working with to find housing. Your client really needs to be that landlord. So the staff who are responsible for building those relationships ideally need to be someone who does not also have a caseload of clients, and it's someone who needs to understand the mission and embrace the goal of Housing First, but the experience and skills that you're looking for are related to real estate, property management, or sales and marketing, not necessarily social services. It needs to be someone who can speak the language that landlords speak, that understands their business, understands the concerns and needs of a property owner. They also need to partner very, very closely with the staff who are working with your clients on the housing search process. Next slide, please. So in terms of what the staff who are working with landlords are doing, it's really important that they know the market and that they know the product. So knowing the market, that means knowing the kind of housing that exists in your community and the kind of housing that you're looking for. Is it small, individual units? Is it large multifamily buildings? Is it individual landlords who may own one rental property or own a handful of rental properties? Is it larger companies, either property management companies or investors? It's important to understand their criteria. What are they screening for? What is the gray area where they may be willing to accept someone? And where is the line of what they will not accept in terms of credit rating, eviction history, rental history, criminal history, etc. You really need to customize your service to each landlord. What do they want from you? Do they want you to help them pre-screen, or are they going to do the full screening themselves? Do they want to just let you know when they have a unit become vacant and you take it from there and make sure that it gets filled? Do they want to play a more active role? And always follow up on what you commit to. And one of the most important things as you build relationships with landlords is to get to the point where you can be the first one that they call before a unit is listed. If you know that a unit is coming on the market, you can get in there and pre-screen a family, have them view the unit, submit an application, and the landlord never even has to list it to the general public. In terms of knowing the product, what are the advantages of working with you? Why should a landlord work with you? So again, meeting the needs of the landlord, being very responsive to them and to what they're looking for. It's important to them to protect their asset, so how is risk mitigated in the relationship with you? Next slide, please. And the most important of all of this, the key to success, is really maintaining the relationship. Being available and responsive 24/7. That doesn't mean necessarily that you're responding to a call at 3 a.m., but that they always know who they can call and that someone will always call them back the next day. Maintaining regular communication with them. If you have not heard anything from them, check in. Find out how things are going. At the same time, you can ask if they know of any other units that are coming available. Always be ready to problem solve. Are there concerns that they have regarding the tenancy of a family that you've placed there? Do they have other concerns that maybe you can refer them to other resources and assistance available to landlords in the community that they might not be aware of? And really be ready to play that mediation role between understanding and being clear about what the landlord responsibilities are and what the tenant responsibilities are, and being able to communicate that clearly, both with the landlord, if there are concerns, for example, regarding a timely repair, and with the case manager who's working with the client that's placed in their unit if there are concerns about their tenancy. There are some tools that we also use in terms of a landlord mediation fund if there are damages, excessive damages, or if, for example, if a family needs to break their lease to leave the unit early, assisting with either vacancy loss or with releasing the unit. So there are some tools that we also use at Hamilton Family Center that help mitigate the risks that the landlord might face. Overall, the goal is to protect the relationship, and by protecting the relationship, everyone will protect their investment. So that's the family's investment in building their new home, the organization's investment in ending homelessness, and the landlord's investment in their property. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Freed to get their perspective on landlord relationships.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I'm Chris Freed. I'm with LA Family Housing, committed to ending family homelessness, and really excited to be on this call today. Next slide, please. So for many years, we've done what many of you have done. We've used the list provided to us by the housing authorities, by the counties, by the cities, and by the providers that we work with. Through those platforms, we were able to make some really great connections and build relationships that gave us greater access to units as they became available. About 6 months ago, though, we looked at the number of properties and the number of landlords and owners that we were working with and found that while we had about 170 properties in our portfolio in terms of the units that we were working with in the community, that only really equated to about 30 landlords. And we had about 250 families, and still have quite a number of families in the queue trying to identify housing. And so what we learned was that we needed to do something differently. Next slide, please. Okay, so we needed to shake it up a bit. And in order to do that, we needed to relook at what we were trying to do. We needed to obtain new housing, and we needed to create more relationships. We needed to introduce ourselves to landlords that weren't already connected to places like social serve, because let's just be honest, all the providers in our community and we're using the same exact housing bank and getting the same leads. So we were all calling the same landlords over and over again. So we needed to try something completely different, and so we did. We realized that what we needed was a sales force to highlight and market LA family housing, and how the participants we were working with would be an excellent tenant selection choice for the landlords. We started cold calling new landlords, property management firms, using title pages from real estate databases to connect with more owners and to learn when units were becoming available. And then we used some incentives to get the person in the property, to get to the right person in the property management office, right? So we were working really hard to get past the receptionist, and oftentimes we were getting blocked. And so we did little things like buy $5 Starbucks cards to just start and to be able to have those conversations. And then we officially changed the position and the role of our housing locations team. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide basically looks at how we were doing things in the past. We had several housing coordinators wearing several different hats, and I'm going to assume that some of the rural areas and maybe even some of the larger areas are doing similar things to this. They were responsible for a myriad of things, including setting up housing plans, identifying housing units, doing housing inspections, including like lead paint inspections, determining what families were going to pay, setting families up with community resources once they were housed, and the list goes on and on and on. And for this role, the majority of our staff had a degree in social work, whether it was a master's or at least a bachelor's degree. Next slide, please. But things changed. I think our staffing model is extremely critical in our effectiveness and what makes us unique, and honestly what makes us work really well. We had to do a total organizational shift. We looked at what was missing in order for our families to get the care and the service that they needed and deserved. And what we came up with was this model. The intake and assessment component, which is our family response team, which basically meets with families to determine eligibility, get them assessed, get them connected to the most appropriate housing intervention. Then each family was assigned essentially to a housing coordinator, where the coordinator works with the housing locator. And I'm going to get to that just in the next slide to really like talk in depth about that. But their job is basically the housing coordinator works with the locator to match the family to the unit that fits. And then the housing stabilization team that does the whatever it takes model to keep a family housed. They work with the client. They do not work with the landlord. And they work with the housing locators if there is a problem being communicated either by the landlord or the participant once families are in housing. And also the housing stabilization team works with our employment team, which is very, very similar in nature to the way that we work with our housing location team. Next slide, please. Okay, so the locator is the key here. Their function is not to work with the family directly. Their role is to pound the pavement, if you will. They are out there meeting with landlords, property owners, developers, property management firms, and they're selling the services that we can provide to them by accepting our families into their open units. And I'll be honest with you, I think we all know this is not always an easy sale. We are placing families that have zero income, and when I say zero, I mean zero. And we're also working with families that are on Calworks that don't necessarily meet the same level of income that is often required. But this is where building relationships and maintaining it is so critical. Our housing locators are the housing whisperers, if you will. They cater to the landlord only. They do the housing inspections, they negotiate the terms of the lease, but most importantly, they build and maintain the relationships that will lead to more and more placements, more and more connections, and more opportunities for the families that we serve. These folks do not need to be social service folks, and I'm going to reiterate that. These guys need to be able to sell. They need to be able to follow through, they need to be attentive, and they need to be committed to our landlords. Next slide, please. In LA, through our coordinated entry system, we were able to create some incentives to make working with us more attractive. Both the city and the county in our area have decided to create a fund to hold units while matches are being made. In other words, landlords can receive 1 month of rent while they are looking for the right tenant and or waiting for the Section 8 process to occur, because we all know that Section 8 takes or can take a really long time. There are also set-aside fees to cover damages that tenants make to the unit. We, of course, have the ability to help subsidize rent and cover move-in costs. We're able to cover rent arrears to help avoid eviction. And we have an amazing stabilization team that are able to assist clients with issues as they arise while they're in housing. But the most important sales incentive that we offer is the ability to have someone available if there's an emergency. When our landlord calls, we respond. We don't ignore, we don't wait, we follow up as soon as we possibly can, because we've learned that that is the most critical component to maintaining our relationship and to opening up more units for us, for our families. And I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to transition into talking about strategies for housing search. So next slide, please. So I like to think that the staff who are working with clients in the housing search process both have the most challenging and the most rewarding role. They're working with the client when they're in the crisis, in the emergency of homelessness, but they're also supporting them as they get that key to a new home. So the keys to success in this role are preparation and the pace and timeliness. So in terms of preparation, it's very, very important that this role works with the client to understand their barriers, to know exactly what the landlord is going to see on their housing application, in their credit report, the eviction history, criminal history, whatever background checks that the landlord performs or expects, and to prepare the family on how to answer. Like, what is their explanation? What is the story that they're going to tell the landlord? It's also very important that they understand the needs and the preferences of the family, and that they work with the family and coach them to balance that with the realistic housing options in your market. The other key to success is really the pace of the role. It's so important. Timeliness is everything in the housing market, especially when you're in a very tight housing market. You need to act very quickly and respond to available units before they're gone. You need to be in constant communication both with the family and with the staff who are working on locating units, so that you can immediately get someone out to see the unit, view a unit, and submit an application. Next slide, please. So one of the keys to success in Hamilton Family Center is how we use technology to increase our effectiveness, especially in terms of communication and ensuring that we can react quickly. So we use technology as a tool during the housing search process. We built a database of landlords and housing units that's linked to our client database in Salesforce, and we use a product called Salesforce Communities that allows us to share information on available housing units and allow families who are engaged in search to do their own online search through the housing units that are available with the landlords that we have relationships with. That allows them to actively engage in their own search, to take sort of a lead role if they want to. It also allows the case manager to play that support role with the family if they need more assistance in the search process. And by having this link to our client database, we keep information up to date in real time. It's a critical communication tool between the different staff and the different teams or partner agencies if you're working with other agencies on some of the roles. Next slide, please. So one of the most important and critical aspects of what the housing specialist does with the client is to develop a profile. What is their housing search profile? Who are they? And knowing everything about them so that you can help them to identify appropriate units, and so that the staff who are the landlord relationship builders and the housing unit locator staff also know exactly what they're looking for. What is the size in terms of type of housing that you're looking for, locations, preferences, any community ties or supports that the family that you're working with already has. So where are they looking to live? What are their preferences? Where are places they absolutely cannot or are not interested in living? The affordability level in that area, access to any services that they need. What is their rental limit? When we're working with clients, the rental limit is determined through a combination of the amount of income they currently have, the sources of income, and then working with them on a plan of what their potential is to increase their income so that they'll be able to sustain the housing on their own. Also understanding, as I said before, the potential barriers. Any that you can clear, great, clear them, but really be ready to explain what you can't. Next slide, please. So the key is really making a good match between the client who's applying for a unit and the landlord. Advising the clients about the landlord criteria, and really don't refer or don't recommend them to apply to a unit if you know that they are most likely not going to be accepted. Rejection is very, very hard. So the housing specialist also really needs to be a great motivator and coach to keep the momentum up, because it's likely that the person is going to hear no. Making sure that they understand the lease once they're at that stage, that the family really understands what they're committing to, what's expected of them, how to communicate with the landlord if they need something to get that relationship off on a good start. And really making sure that you've done a very, very good walkthrough of the unit during the move-in inspection with the family, and that you do home visits following that to keep an eye on it and make sure that everything is going okay and is getting off to a good start. And I am going to turn it back over to Chris.
Awesome. So, who we house. We work with homeless families and individuals at LA Family Housing, and the only real requirement is that they're below 50% AMI and that they're homeless. We're housing families in LA that have zero income. And I know I've said that a couple of times, but I think it's really critical to say it again, because we're housing families with zero income in Los Angeles, and we're making it happen. It's not easy, but we are getting it done. Next slide, please. So in that vein of housing folks with little to no income, we look at affordability, but from a projected lens, not what the current situation is, but what we anticipate it to be, or what we anticipate it could be, and what the family anticipates that it could be. Additionally, we find it super important to get feedback from the participant in terms of what they want and what they're looking for. Things like what area you want to live in, how many bedrooms do you want. We will look at a tool, and not next slide, but the following slide, that we use that may help you in terms of being able to work with a participant on their choice and what that actually looks like. Next slide. So how we match. Matching works like this for us. Our housing location team sends out a daily vacancy report. Our housing coordination team identifies families that would be a good fit based on information submitted to them by the family. So I'm going to give you an example. If we have a family that wants a one-bedroom in Van Nuys, which is a suburb in Los Angeles, and they want that one-bedroom near Van Nuys High School because they have a kid who goes to school, the locator puts out that they have identified a one-bedroom in Van Nuys within walking distance to the school. Then the family's names, and then that housing coordinator submits that family's name to the locator so that an appointment can be set for the family to meet up with the property manager. However, here's the one where the match gets shifted a little bit, and that's if we have a family that stated that another family also stated that they want a one-bedroom in the valley, and they might not have specified an area, but that they have a voucher that's going to expire in a couple of days. Then we submit their name to the locator first, and that's because we want to make sure that the family that needs it the most gets it. And unfortunately, that might push another family back, but we will identify another unit for that family. If the family or the landlord feels that the unit is not a good fit, we always have 2 backups for each unit, so that we make sure that we can fill the unit as quickly as possible. That helps maintain our relationship with the landlord because the unit sits, it doesn't sit vacant for a long period of time. The note that is super important when you are working with a new landlord or even an existing one, and Elizabeth touched this and so did Marge, but I'm just going to reiterate it, is that we must work within their parameters. If they refuse to take someone with an eviction, then don't match someone with an eviction to them, at least not on the first go-around. Have a good experience or two, and then approach them again with the, can we revisit the eviction elimination factor? If you give the landlords what they are looking for and things work out the first few tries, then that's where the window opens up to be able to go back to them and talk to them about the families that might not meet all of their ideal criteria. Next slide, please. So this is a tool that I was talking about. I absolutely love this tool because it puts the decision-making hand so much in the hand of the participant. You can ask the family what type of unit they want, and income that they are making or the income that they anticipate being able to make. And then you have them fill out the entire budget, right, with like the projected rent based on what the FMR is in your area for if they wanted, let's say, in this particular example, a 2-bedroom. You have them fill out all what the projected utilities are, and if you don't, if the families don't necessarily know that, there's sheets that are typically given out by the Department of Water and Power or whatever it's called in your area that can tell you what a typical cost is for those type of utilities. And then have them list all of their expenditures. And an honest list. If they smoke, make sure you add it in there, because they're probably not going to quit smoking the day that you move them into an apartment. So, and then you start building it backwards, and they can see for themselves if what they've selected is a feasible option or if they're going to need to change their expectations. And this is like a really good scenario here where you have a family size of 5, you have 2 adults and 3 kids, they want a 2-bedroom, they work part-time at Target and get Calworks. And when we were talking to this particular family, was there a desire to increase employment at the particular time? It was no. And so we went through the entire budget and showed them that on this particular circumstance, they were going to be about $2,025 a month short once our assistance ended. And so it changed their idea about what they were looking for in the area that they were looking for it in. Next slide. The takeaways. So I have 3 essential takeaways, 3 key factors. So we're available. You got to be available to take the calls and to deal with the crises as they occur, and to take leads of the available units. We listen to the landlord's needs, their concerns, their desires, and we understand that this is their business. This is typically an economic factor for them, and so it's an investment for them, and that we're just as interested in protecting their investment as we are the participants that we're working with. And that's what I have. Back to Marge.
Okay, Jen, do you have any questions for our 2 presenters?
I do. I've had a few. We have time for a few questions, so please send in any questions that you have. But we have a few that have come in. I guess this is to anybody who is presenting. What suggestions do you have for getting large property management companies on board with our program?
I can try to answer that. This is Chris.
Great.
Yeah, I would say that obviously the main, so if you're talking about a large property management company that has just one decision maker, then you do whatever it takes to get to that decision maker. What we've learned in LA is that we have a lot of really large property management firms, and they have small little components and decision makers, many different decision makers. And so we try to get to as many decision makers as we possibly can. But again, it's about getting to them, and it's about sitting down, and it's about even if they tell you no the first time, keep going back. Give it a month, go back, send them information, go in there, be very professional, have a pamphlet that describes the different types of programs that you have and the incentives and the services that you can offer, and never give up. Just keep trying, because no the first time is people's typical response to things. They don't want to hear it. But when you're in sales, you just have to keep going back and keep trying, because usually that no at some point could potentially turn into a yes if you get the right fit.
I'll just add, I agree. It's important to be persistent, and I think that often there are individual property managers at the different sites if it's a large company that manages multiple sites, and you can start on the ground and get to know one of them and refer a client that's really you think is going to be a great match for what they're looking for their property, and let them have a good experience and keep in touch with them, and then build on that. And on the larger, higher level decision maker level, I think a good tact to take is to really get to know and join local apartment associations or networks of property managers or real estate associations, and that's how you can really network and get to know people, and likely some of the higher level decision makers.
And this is Marge, I would just add a couple of things. One is that you can use one of your enthusiastic landlord partners to help you recruit someone new. And second, have the landlord that you're targeting factor in the costs of an eviction, how long the unit sits empty without rent coming in while the eviction is going on, and then the costs of advertising and screening and all of that, it's a pretty hefty amount, and it becomes more apparent that you can save them a lot of money. In many cases, you can assure them of 100% occupancy for the units that they work with you on.
Thank you. Questions come in. Are there any key strategies for pitching rapid rehousing to landlords who up to this point are only willing to deal with clients who have permanent subsidies? I don't know if Chris or Elizabeth wants to.
I mean, I guess we always start, this is Elizabeth from Hamilton Family Center. We start with our success rate. We have over 93% of the people that we place in housing maintain that housing 2 years later. So that's a pretty good selling point. We also, a lot of in the San Francisco Bay Area, our rapid rehousing program is structured that many of the subsidies that we provide are for up to 12 months. So we can often let the landlord know that there's the family may be signing a 12-month lease with them, that the family's eligible to be in our program that entire time.
Thank you. How do you address fair housing laws with landlords who state they cannot accept tenants based on their guidelines for qualification?
That's an interesting question, because I guess I would have to go back and say, like, what types of what guidelines are they not meeting? In terms of, yeah, I think I would need more information to feel comfortable answering that question. Sorry.
You know, I think sometimes landlords think that if they give preference to your people, that in some ways then they're discriminating against people that are not connected to your program. And one of the things that's been successful in recruiting landlords is to talk about how, because you work with people who are extremely low income, many of whom have disabilities or are people of color, that it's not a problem to discriminate in favor of protected classes. It's when you're discriminating against protected classes, and that by working with you, they kind of have evidence that they are not violating fair housing because of the types of people that you refer to them.
Thanks, Marge. What are the benefits of using smaller mom and pop versus larger property management companies?
I would say that when you use smaller mom and pops, sorry, this is Chris, I think when you use smaller mom and pops, first of all, it's a really great way to build your confidence and to as a rapid rehousing program, one. And then two, I think that a lot of small mom and pops also happen to know a lot of other small mom and pops that are in the real estate business and that own units, and so it's a really great way if you do really well with one to get the relationships with other ones through referral sources. And so we've had a lot of luck with mom and pops and being able to grow our landlord database just by utilizing their friends.
Thank you. How does a risk reduction fund work, and how can programs fund it?
This is Elizabeth from Hamilton. So we have some private funding that supplements our rapid rehousing program, and we actually funded ours through the private funding that we receive. And they can work differently in different communities depending on your need. So often we will already often pay a double deposit, security deposit, or a landlord may request a double security deposit, and that's available to them for whenever, that's their own risk mitigation fund for when the family moves out of their unit, if there's any damages to the unit, etc. So our risk mitigation fund is really more for if there's issues and the family has to leave, break their lease, either because it's happened where a family has gotten into affordable housing, and so they've broken the lease that they had in order to move into a permanently affordable unit, which is a great opportunity. We want to support them in doing that, and so we can use the mitigation fund to sort of cover any costs, whether it's due to vacancy loss or releasing that the landlord may face, so that they don't charge the family a fee for breaking their contract. Or if there's an eviction that occurs, and if it's a landlord that we have an ongoing relationship with and that is continuing to work with us, and there are some legal expenses that they're not able to cover through the security deposit, they could apply to have part of that covered through the risk mitigation fund.
Great, thank you. Could you share your thoughts on shared housing and if you're using this model, and if so, how you're structuring leases and pitching this to landlords?
I can go first. We really like shared housing, both for individuals and families. Obviously, for families, we focus much more on the smaller units, the smaller families. So usually, like single mom with one or two kids, with another single mom with one or two kids, and one for a two-bedroom apartment. We're working with the landlords here. Some of them are working with us where they have two separate leases, and some of them are working where it's just one lease. And how it's working really well for us is that even if the situation doesn't necessarily work out between the families, so if one family says it's not working out and they want to leave, we're working with the family to either identify another family and put them in there, or help them identify their own families through their own apartment search techniques, whether that be Craigslist or other things, to find and interview potential roommates that may be a good fit. But for the individuals, it's working out really, really well in terms of it saves an awful lot of money. If you can rent a 3-bedroom for 3 individuals, it's a lot cheaper than to put 3 individuals into a single apartment. And so from the rapid housing standpoint, it just makes financial sense to do that.
Great, thank you. What community events are you finding are best for finding landlords?
This is Elizabeth. I mentioned before, joining local apartment associations or realtors associations. Those are great ways to network and to find landlords and find families. But then there's also, through churches or religious affiliations, those are great community networking opportunities, or your board of directors might be a great place to start. Many people either have property that may be rental property or know people that do have property that's rental property, and just getting to know one person. They may not have a unit that fits the criteria and fits what you're looking for in terms of the sector of the market, but they may be able to then make an introduction that gets you into the front door.
I have one thing to add to that, and I think that it's really important for your elected officials to take a stance on this as well. I think that I was recently talking to some colleagues about when Michelle Obama made a big pitch. I think she did a public service announcement, and it was on TV, and really was talking about getting veterans housed, and it made a really big difference, at least in our community. We saw the impact that it had. And so recently, just a couple of weeks ago, actually, our county supervisor did an event with us on landlord engagement day. And so we got the Board of Real Estate involved, the Board of Real Estate Association, involved, and all the landlord associations involved. And we were able to pull about 300 landlords in one day in one room and provide them presentations from both from the rapid rehousing side, as well as we had the county and city Section 8 folks there that were able to convey their message as well, to be able to get landlords to really want to participate in our programs and to house the population that we're working with.
Thank you. Chris, this is a question for you about the budgeting tool that you presented. Is this something that your organization built, or is it something that might be available to other providers? Can you provide more information about that?
Sure. I mean, yes, I created that, and I'm more than willing to share that. And it's a nice tool because you can just put in the numbers and it auto populates. So that's nice. But I'd definitely be willing to share that. I think a lot of it though is just in the presentation. I think a lot of people have their own budgeting tools, but my whole point to that tool is that you're able to go back to the families and really be able to show them what's going to be affordable based on the information that they gave. And so it's meant to help people see how they're going to be able to sustain whatever type of unit that they're putting in. But for sure, I'll share that tool with anybody.
Thank you. Can you talk about some of the online tools that you use to identify landlords? We've heard about Zillow and PadMapper, and I know you've talked about some in the presentations. Are there others?
we pay for a service, and I can't remember the name, but I can definitely get it and send it to you, Jen, and then you can send it out to everybody. It's fairly inexpensive, but it gives us access to all the different units, ownership, and developments in our area. And so I can, like I said, I can send that to you. I don't remember the name of it offhand, but it's a service that we pay for.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we also get the MLS listings through the director of our Housing Resources Division is a realtor, and so we get those. We can have access to those listings. But you can also, even looking on Craigslist, it's not the first choice or go-to because that means it's open and there for the general public to see. But sometimes you can reach out to the landlord and connect with them, whoever's renting that property, and find other units that may not be on the market yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions right now. I just wanted to point you to some resources that are on the Alliance's website, the Rapid ReHousing Performance Benchmarks and Program Standards. The webinar was on May 13th. We have put together a Rapid ReHousing Know-How series for new providers that has some resources, blogs, webinars. That's also on this through this link, and then a history and core components of rapid rehousing. That's available on our website as well. And just a reminder to please mark your calendars for 2 more webinars coming up on Thursday, June 9th at 11 a.m. It'll be the second core component, rent and move-in assistance. And the final webinar will be held on June 23rd on case management and services. We are planning to post the audio from this webinar on our website, endhomelessness.org, after the event. And we just wanted to thank all of the presenters again and hope that you will join us again on June 9th. Thank you.